My special guest tonight is one of the greatest photojournalists of them all, Don McCullin. Welcome to Masterclass. He was born in poverty, had a promising career as a delinquent, until he suddenly discovered a gift with a camera. For the past 50 years, he's looked at the world, its people and its landscapes with an unflinching and yet a compassionate eye. But it's his witness to man's inhumanity of man in wars and their aftermath that forged his reputation as the greatest photojournalist of his time. One critic said his pictures were like candles you couldn't extinguish and stains you couldn't remove. Ladies and gentlemen, Don McCullin. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Again, that's what, 30 years ago was it? Last time we did this kind of interview together. Let me ask you about your beginnings, because you had a fascinating childhood. You once said you were a product of Adolf Hitler. Why? In what sense?
Well, I was born in 1935, and I was bombed in 1940. So I felt as if that somebody was trying to do harm to me from the word go.
It was personal.
I thought it was, because I used to be afraid of those bombs when they came raining down. And yet, in the morning, as a boy, I went to school, a primary school, and we used to collect the shrapnel and exchange, you know, I've got this and you've got that. And so, in a way, war is exciting, but it's not very congenial.
And that was your first glimpse at a very early age in London during the bombing, which is where you were brought up. And you came from a poverty-stricken background, actually. I mean, your father was an invalid. You lived in slum conditions. Your mother is a remarkable woman. I mean, she held the family together, but she was a fighting woman, wasn't she?
Well, I bore most of the brunt of her temper, particularly when the woodbines ran out. She used to have, you know, a terrible temper, and you know, people who run out of cigarettes, you know, they get a bit shaky. So I used to hide, and she used to send me to the door and tell people she wasn't in when they came, like they called them tally men in those days. Right. You had things on tick.
Sure.
And it was very humiliating for me as a child, as well as seeing my father die, as well as not having a bath in the house or a lavatory in the house. I was always a bit ashamed of that side of my life. But looking back now, I'm rather pleased I started off like that.
But she was a strong woman, wasn't she? I mean, she was literally a fighting woman. She would bash people.
Well, if anyone criticized me or my sister, it was embarrassing sometimes. My mother would, first of all, my mother beat the man upstairs one night with a huge Dutch ornament, which was one at Hampstead Heath, made of chalk, luckily, for him, because he was beating his child with a belt at midnight. So, you know, we lived in that kind of ignorant environment where people did terrible things, and looking back on it, I was sometimes embarrassed about my mother, but people say to me, you shouldn't have been, because she was only doing what most mothers do. And she had a hell of a life looking after my dying father. And we all slept in this room, 4 of us. You know, it's very difficult to grow up as a child, go to school in the shirt you wear, sleep in it, and sleep in the same room as your mother and father. It was psychologically quite demanding.
But how did you then escape that environment? I mean, you had no ambition to be a photographer at all.
No.
You had no ambition. I mean, you were dyslexic, you weren't very good at school. You ran with a gang. Now,
Yes.
this gang was important in your development, wasn't it?
Well, there's still gangs around today, and they expect the same of you. You've got to be either in them or out of them. So I was in with these boys, and many of them went to prison for serious offences. And eventually there was a murder at the bottom of my street in Finsbury Park, North London. A policeman tried to intervene and was knifed in the back, died at the bottom of my road. And sadly, my whole career, because I'd photographed these boys in a house at the bottom of my street, just as an amateur, I had this camera which I brought back from the Air Force. And you could say my whole life, my whole career in photography was only blessed by the beginning of it by violence.
Well, let's have a look at that, because it's an iconic picture now. How old were you when you took that picture?
I think I was about 22.
22. And so you framed, in this derelict warehouse, you framed the members of your gang, and it became instantly a very, very powerful image of the gang who murdered the policeman, the gangs, the kind of kids who get involved in this sort of thing. And of course, it's been much copied too. So therefore, there was this kind of accidental start to your career, in a sense. That picture, you couldn't possibly foresee what might happen. It was printed in the Observer. It made you instantly a reputation. And then you went to your first war. You went to Cyprus.
I went into the Observer newspaper one day, and by the way, I'd already been to the Berlin War situation before the Cyprus War. I did that on my own initiative. I went into the office, and the editor said, "Would you consider going to the civil war in Cyprus?" And I thought at that point I was actually levitating. I thought I was rising up, and I said yes, I would, and off I went, and I found myself in this gun battle in Limassol. Bearing in mind, I was in the Air Force in Cyprus 2 or 3 years before, so I knew the area.
Yes.
But I was the only person, apart from the ecclesiastical correspondent of the Observer. We were trapped in this gun battle. I was thrilled to bits. He said he had a dinner appointment in Nicosia. I managed to drive out in a wild, crazy way, thinking the exhaust had fallen off the car, and I got out and looked under it, and it was perfectly all right, but it was the Bren guns firing over our heads that was making the noise. So he got his dinner appointment, and I got this exclusive
Let's have a look at this picture that you took there. This is the wonderful image. I mean, it's the shadow, it's the lighting. It's like a gangster movie. It's like the mafia. It's exactly the way it's dressed, and it's a brilliant picture.
Well, you couldn't dress this set as a movie scene, and a lot of people would really question whether it was a movie still. But after this man out of the side of the cinema came women and children. They were wearing mattresses, thinking for 1 second that a mattress would stop a bullet. And it was quite an eye-opener for me. And women and children, you know, they don't belong in wars. It's normally...
Yeah, they're the terrible victims.
They are the ones who pick up the bill all the time.
Which we'll see in a moment. Now, so that was the beginning, and that was an example of a picture which you took, and you must have, when you said, oh, that's great. But have you ever been in a situation, all the war situations you've been in, have you ever felt like rearranging a picture, recomposing it to make a point? Have you ever done that?
Just once in my life.
Once, and that was when?
I was in Vietnam, and I was in a massive battle that went on for 2 weeks, which suited my purpose, really, because, you know, going to war, there are always people trying to stop you. The war in Vietnam was on an epic scale, as we all know, and you could go there and you would be accredited to the American Army as a complimentary rank of major, which is way above my previous status in life. And you could go and get a helicopter like one orders a taxi. And so this great raging battle, which was there for the taking, I was involved in. And then one day I saw I'd been sleeping near a body which I didn't know was there. That's what war's like. You sleep with the dead. You embrace the dead, the smell of them, the sight of them. You see tanks running over bodies, and in my own kind of words, if you'll forgive me for saying so, they become Persian carpets. You see things, unmentionable things. So you live with those things. You become slightly insane for that period. And I saw one day some American Marines who I was attached with. They were raking over the body of this North Vietnamese soldier. I have to own up to the fact I did arrange that photo that's just come on the screen, purely because these soldiers are searching this man's body for souvenirs. And I thought it was slightly disgraceful, really, because I thought this young man, could have only been about 18, 19, was only doing what one expected of him. He was fighting for the reunification of Vietnam. There's nothing wrong in that, really. It's rather honourable. The mere fact he paid with his life, and they threw his things down, and they were calling him a gook, and they walked away laughing and, you know, despising this man's death and sacrifice. And when he went away, I thought, this is not right. I'm going to become this man's voice. And I scooped up those pathetic little possessions, pictures of his girlfriend or mother, and his little kit in case he got injured. And I did this picture. I have no shame in admitting it, and I think it was the right thing to do. I became his voice.
Yes, of course. Well, because you're human. Let's have a question. I think the first questioner is Jupan Gamsari.
Yep. Hi there, Don. Who would you say has been your biggest inspiration?
Many people, really. I mean, we all need to go back and study the masters, and, you know, me not being a great reader because of my dyslexia, I'm a great looker instead. I have masses of information in my head, purely visual. But I like the work of a man called Eugene Smith, a crazy American, who, you know, who demanded a lot from his supporters and friends. He would take thousands of dollars and he'd never get the prints. I can guarantee I don't do that. But there's a man called Alfred Stieglitz who lived in the turn of the century in New York, and Bill Brand, the emigre from Germany who lived in England. But they're all a bit weird, these people. You can't be a normal person and abandon your family and live in squalid conditions. I mean, I've lived in every known squalid place in this world, under tables and rat-infested rooms. You know, it's amazing what ambition will do to you when you're young and you're healthy and you're willing. And that's why I won't dodge any questions that come at me. Photography made me feel very... I try to get rid of my massive inferiority complex from my childhood.
I think, of course, if you ask that question of many young photographers and aspiring photographers, they'd say that, in fact, you were their role model. You've never been necessarily modest, not like you at all. We'll be back in just a moment. You've chosen from your thousands of pictures just 3 that have a particular resonance in your life. And this is, again, an image that went round the world. And it's a soldier, an American soldier in Vietnam, and that's what's commonly called the 1,000-yard stare. This is a soldier who's been brought to the brink of a nervous breakdown by what he's seen. What were the circumstances in which you took this picture?
Well, I was attached to these people. I didn't know this man, and I slept in another shell hole that night before. I came back to this company, Delta Company. It was on the old Citadel Wall in Hue in 1968. And I saw this man sitting there, but I noticed something odd about him because he didn't move. And I said to the sergeant, "What's the matter with him?" And he said, "I don't know and I don't care." You see, those Marine sergeants have no feeling for people who he thought he was, you know, trying to get out of the fighting and was going into shell shock, which he was. So I dropped on my knees and I photographed this man. And in those days, I didn't have a motor winder. It was each individual photograph. I took 5 frames of this man, and they're all identical. He simply didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't do anything. So if I damage one of those negatives, I know I've got another 4 left. So.
And it's an extraordinary picture because it tells the story, doesn't it? It represents so much about that war, and about any war.
I don't know why, but I have to tell you, I'm sick of this photograph because people now identify me with only this photograph. Quite frankly, I've got much more powerful images that, you know, speak much more than this. This is not about self-pity, I agree, but I think, what does it do for war? It shows you that war is a terrible thing, but war has many characteristics.
Were you at this point, it's a phrase that you use yourself, seduced by war?
Well, you could say that as a young boy I was seduced by Hollywood's version of war, which isn't true.
No.
You never see any bloodstains, you never see any half of skulls flying through the air on people's brains, and forgive me for being crude, but, you know, when it comes down to it, war is a butcher's business.
Yes.
It's not about humanity, it's not about sanity, it's about cruelty and awfulness, really. So, you know, you could say, well, why did you do it? But I felt that someone ought to do it, and someone ought to show you how bad it was.
Now, this next picture that we're going to see is, again, it's about the consequence of war. You mentioned earlier that the people who suffer most of all are the innocents in war, the women and the children particularly. This was taken in Biafra. Could you explain the circumstances?
But when the war progressed, then the famine, the starvation appeared, and I walked into this school complex one day and found 800 dying children, and scenes that, if you think this is bad enough, this is nothing compared with things I saw. And I saw this boy immediately because he was an albino. And I have to say, I think this is probably one of the most shocking pictures I've ever taken. And so I thought, I saw this boy, he was clutching a French corned beef tin from some previous, he'd licked the inside of that tin dry. And I thought to myself, I'm going to get away from this boy because he was hurting me from the word go. And I went to talk to a French doctor who was dealing with another death of a child. And suddenly somebody was touching my hand, and I looked down, and this boy was holding my hand. And I thought that was as close as I was going to get to a kind of public breakdown. You know, I'm only a human being after all. So, and
then you took the picture of him after that?
Well, I gave him a barley sugar out of my pocket, and he went and stood at a distance, was licking this barley sugar, and he never took his eyes off me. You've got to remember that when these people saw a white man coming into these camps, they thought we were some form of salvation. They thought we were aid workers bringing aid and food. And all I was a kind of stupid man with a Nikon camera around my neck. So it was a day of great shame for me, really.
That became, of course, not just an outstanding image of that war, that situation, but of all time, in a sense. I mean, I have to tell you that is one of the most powerful pictures I've ever seen. And I think most of the audience here tonight would think that. Does it haunt you?
Well, I don't print it anymore.
You don't?
No, if you're in the dark room, which is quite a lonely and yet comforting place, really, this picture comes up in the developer. It talks to you, and it curses you, and it hurts you. And I haven't printed that picture for about 20 years.
Let's move on now to another picture, but this time you didn't take this picture because you're featured in it. You're actually, this is in Cyprus. We would go back to Cyprus, and that is a Turkish woman. Tell us the situation. What happened there?
Well, I'm still a very young photographer. This is my first war.
Yes.
And I hate really talking about it. I feel as if I'm blowing my own trumpet, really. But I saw a whole bunch of people coming towards me, and a huge gunfire erupted, which was coming from the Greek side of things. And I saw this English soldier trying to nurture this old lady along, and I thought, if they don't get cracking, that old girl's going to get killed, and the soldier. And I don't know why, but I said to my friend, another English photographer, I said, look after my camera. And something made me go out and pick her up, and it was like picking up a rag doll. She weighed nothing, and I was young, and I fled up that road with her. And I don't know why I did it, really. I think I did it because I couldn't watch somebody being murdered. And I also felt it was my duty as a human being not to see somebody murdered and not be one of the voyeurs who would be, you know, looking in on this terrible possible event.
Let's take some more questions now from the audience. I think Kat Law, where are you? Kat,
Hi.
it's your question.
Did you ever feel like your profession, taking photographs, was ever worth dying over?
Absolutely not, actually. I love life, and I've managed to get this far because I've been blessed by, I don't know who he is, but, you know, no, I don't think it's worth dying for a photograph. I always used an exposure meter. I'd pop up when the bullets are flying, take the meter, and I thought it wouldn't be worth dying and getting an underexposed piece of film. So I took the chance of making sure I got the thing right before I was dead. But I'm not dead, I'm here.
That thing about, what you say there, about those cameras in those days, we'll talk about in just a moment, actually, because people forget now, you stick a camera, bang, away you go, that's no problem at all. And you can look at me, then you've got a snap. In your days, I mean, you had to change the camera, you had to change the film and all that. Let's take one more question from Kate Crowther. Kate Crowther. Kate, where are you? There.
Hi, Don. My question concerns your kind of personal feelings while you're on assignments. Did you ever find it difficult to quell your anger at certain situations while you were on these assignments?
Yes. First of all, my emotions are always running pretty high. I was in a great massacre once in Beirut, and these Christian phalange people, somebody rushed up to me and put a blue ribbon around my neck before they were attacking this area. And I said, what's that for? And he said, oh, that's just to make sure one of our guys don't shoot you. We've all got them. But before they took us into the area, they said, oh, you must photograph this, mister. And they took me over to a telegraph pole, and some clever devil had chopped up a cat and re-nailed it to the telegraph pole. And I thought, it's very strange for me to think this. I thought, these people are really sick and sinister. And then he said, we're going into the East Beirut quarter. And by the way, these are Christians. And they said, we're going to clear out the rats in here today. He said, you're going to see amazing things. And I couldn't work it out. I thought, the rats, what's he talking about? And, you know, so eventually they attacked the area. And they were grabbing men, shooting men and women in front of me. And men were dropping dead and screaming the last breath of air, calling for their God, the Islamic God of Allah. And I was dumbfounded. And I went round the back of a well of this house, because they just killed two men in front of me, close. And I thought, I was shaking, and I thought, you've got to get a grip. And I came around, and the man said, well, by the way, if you take any more pictures around here, I'm going to kill you. And I thought, this man he's just killed somebody, so I better listen to what he's saying. So I walked away from the area. I was trembling, and I heard music. And I said to my friend, he was a Sunday Times correspondent, I said, I can hear music. He said, no, let's get out of here, let's get out. And there were some young boys. They were playing a lute over the body of a dead Palestinian girl who could have only been 16, 17 years of age, and she was lying in a winter puddle. And they were saying, mister, take this picture. And having been warned not to do it, I said to this man, I'm going to do this. And the negative is very thin, but I still got the picture. And I got to the edge of the area, and then I met the opposing people who found a Christian pass on me. They said, we're going to cut your throat. So they dragged me into a room. And by then I was, when you use the word emotion, it went far beyond that. So this was all in the part of a day's work, really.
That's extraordinary. Your story is so extraordinary and so remarkable. It sort of beggars description, really. You speak of it wonderfully well. And I feel myself, while admiring you greatly, the way you tell it and what you've done and your courage, I don't have that kind of guts at all. I doubt that many people have. I mean, I think it takes a very extraordinary character to actually do what you did. I mean, here we have your camera. We were talking about cameras there, weren't we? And we were saying that, you know, the modern camera, you know, you just put it up like that, take a flash and snap it. Oh, very good indeed. With this thing, I mean, you had to actually unload it, load it again. And Harry Evans, your editor, said that the most remarkable thing about you, you did all of that and take a reading while in a zone of fire when people were firing bullets at you. Mm-hmm. So did you develop a technique of doing that, or what?
Yes, I'm very big on praying. And I always felt that after my father died, when I was only 13, and I was very angry about my father dying, so I thought, you're going to have nothing else to do with the church or God. That's all gone now. But really, it was amazing how the Judas would come into my makeup when I thought I really had it. And I'd say, please, God, let me have another chance. And it's a terrible...
It's an instinct.
Well, I think he listened. But it was really, you know, there were days when I was really terrified. That was a particularly bad day for me.
Well, that was. So you explain it, because there's your camera and there is a wound on your camera. To explain what happened.
I went to Cambodia in 1970, and I ran across the field with a platoon of Cambodians who were basically trying to draw out the fire of the Khmer Rouge who were dug into this village. And there was 300 Vietnamese Marines waiting to assault the village, but they were using these Cambodians to find out where the fire was coming. And the commanding officer said, don't go with them, wait for us. And I said, no, I've got to go, because I didn't want to lose my nerve. So we ran across the field splashing, and there was a young boy carrying the Cambodian flag. It was almost Napoleonic, really. He was the first one to go down. And then the bullets started splashing all around us, and I lost it. I got behind the radio operator. I thought, I don't want to get my head, you know, it was my head I was worried about. I thought, you take a bullet anywhere else but your head, so, because they're considered the worst wounds. And then everybody around me was getting killed, and I don't want to make light of this by being, you know, the storyteller, but I thought, I've got to get away from these people, I'm going to get killed. So I ran across the paddy field to the edge, put my camera, and then tried to slide away, and there was dead bodies. I had to move out the way to get by, and I was really scared. And I then eventually got, and then I ran zigzag across this field because I didn't want the sniper to get me, because definitely thought I was possibly an American advisor because I was taller. And I could really shift myself in those days because I was very young. And I got back to the commander of the Marines, and he said, right, we're going in now and you should have listened to me. I thought, I better check my cameras over. And then I found this AK-47 bullet had clipped this camera and gone up, leaving this indentation. Strange enough, the camera worked. I mean, I couldn't use it because there was great holes in it, but it worked, you know, for a couple of years afterwards. And then for many years, I lost this camera. And I was really upset. I thought that's the one thing that I needed to have with me. And I'd loaned it to a museum in Bradford, and they kept it in their storeroom. I think they were hoping I'd fall off the perch so they could then keep it.
What was I mean, a lot of your colleagues were killed. I mean, they're both war correspondents and photographers.
Yes.
Some you knew very well indeed, Larry Burroughs and people like that. Great photographers and good men. Did you feel a sense that you were the lucky one? Is there any kind of feeling of guilt that some people have when they survive a horror and other people die?
Well, the great writer Primo Levi, you know, he tossed himself over the balcony later on in life because of his guilt of surviving Auschwitz. I don't have any guilt because I don't think I deserve to keep on punishing myself. And I don't have you know, I mustn't say this really, but I don't have a great deal of worry about those who did get killed without being a dishonorable person. I feel that if you went to war you went in some way to profit because you actually made a reputation, you know. You became known in your profession and so on and so on. So, you know, we went to war. Why should we expect immunity? Why do you think that, or anyone should think that we should be specialed out and protected? You know, I looked at things that I can't forget for the rest of my life. It affects me. I think it's made me a better person than I started out.
But you're haunted by images, aren't you? Of the situation you filmed.
Well, I've been watching the great series The World at War, which I think there was nothing better ever seen on television. And I was watching a couple of days ago the liberation of one of the camps. And one of the most touching things that I saw was a woman survivor surrounded by bodies kissing the hand of a liberator. And I thought that, you know, as you get older, I don't know if you've ever seen men talking about their war experiences. The older they get, the more pain they seem to fight back the tears. I don't know whether it's because we've come through our human lives as a kind of form of degree, you know, as if we were receiving an honorary degree that we've got this far, but we've certainly learnt a lot more about humanity.
Yeah, I mean, when you're living the life that you led, indeed any life, I mean, you're too busy to consider really all the ramifications. When you get older and you stop doing what you did, then you start thinking about, God, did I really do that? What was it all about? You know, did I make a difference? I mean, was it worth the risk? All those questions. Well,
A, it wasn't worth the risk, and B, I never believe I made a difference. That's the honest truth.
Well, in what sense do you mean you didn't make a difference? What do you mean? That
I don't really, I don't know the answer to everything, but, you know, I've seen so many people murdered in front of me. I'm bound to be, I'm not a manic depressive, I'm in control of myself, but I am bound to have doubts. And I'm doubting my whole life's work. That's why I turned away from it, and I started looking at the English landscape.
Oh, you did some wonderful landscapes. I mean, you did one of my favourite landscapes, and that's because it reminds me very much of where I came from, which is West Hartlepool is the source of the part of the country you photographed, far away from Yorkshire, but nonetheless, it's let's have a look at it. This picture here just actually really sums up a background I remember very well from the Yorkshire coalfields, and that's a brilliant picture. It's like a Lowry painting. That it's brilliant.
Well, it's very kind of you to say that, but I've always had this passion about the north of England. I've always felt there was a divide. There's no doubt about it, there was. And I studied the work of people like Bill Brandt and others, and I remember this was the great winter of 1963. I got in my old Ford Consul. I drove 300 miles up to north of England, stopping off at various places where I saw men struggling to gather coal dust from the sea, which would have netted them the princely sum of 10p a bag for, you know, for days grovelling in that bitter cold winter northeast winds. And I slept in my car the night before because I couldn't afford a hotel. And I got up in the morning and I saw that photograph, and I must confess that I thought it could have been what you would have seen in Auschwitz, the chimneys waiting to consume human bodies. And I thought, oh, I need a man, I need someone to fill this landscape with that funny old fence that was down and covered in frost. And sure enough, a man obliged me. He came round the wall, he came round this wall, and he started walking up there. I took this one picture, only one picture, I don't know why, because I was very inexperienced. And I got in my car, I was so thrilled that I wasn't caring very much, and I crashed into a bus on the outskirts of town. And I was depressed about that. I thought, oh, sod it, I've got this picture, don't worry about the car. And I thundered through the night driving home. And I remember getting to Leicester and winding the window down and letting the air hit my face, because it was criminal, really. I was on the verge of falling asleep. But, you know, inspiration can do wonders for you. And it's just one of my favourite pictures, and nobody's dying in it.
That's true. It's very evocative. You also take one of your favourite portraits, I happen to know, is this one we've got here now. Look at that. Now that's, well, explain to me who he was and the way you took that picture.
One day I used to go into Liverpool Street Station And I looked over the viaducts when I lived in Hertfordshire, and I would see these destitute people. They weren't the kind of people you see today, which today's people are young homeless people. These were people who were cast out from mental institutions, and, you know, men who had serious mental problems, and people who wanted to be alone. They didn't want anything to do. And I went to the Sunday Times. I said, can I do something about the homeless? And they never said no to me. And I was very fortunate. So off I went. I spent 6 weeks hanging out with these people. Some of it was comical, which I dare to say. But one of these men said, I want to give you a word of advice. When you look at these people, they're going to put the dead eye on you. Do not flinch away. I was never afraid of anybody when I was young. I was always thought I could look after myself. And I saw this man, this amazing man, this handsome man, and I call this picture Neptune. He looks like the Roman god Neptune under the sea. He had the bluest eyes you've ever seen. He'd been daubed by the Hare Krishna the night before, who'd given him a bowl of soup. I thought it was degrading to do that. And this man, I just stared into these eyes, and I don't think you could see a more beautiful, handsome, dignified man. And you can see he's allowed me to trust me. Of course, he doesn't look great in this condition. And, but, you know, I won't betray people who give me their trust.
let's take some more questions from the audience. Chris Bonus. Chris is a cameraman here, the supervisor. There he is. Chris, you have a question to ask Don.
Don, we had a conversation a couple of years ago when you said that obviously you shoot film, and I could see why you would have a fondness for a film camera, certainly that one. But you weren't interested in digital at that time. Have you changed your mind since? If so, why? And if not, why not again?
Isn't it strange you should ask that question? Because I spent last week being taught how to use digital cameras in the south of France. They're wonderful, they're extraordinary. I still don't think, you know, I mustn't give up film. You can still get it. And it means locking myself in the dark room, playing some serious classical music and, you know, leaving the world outside and to get on with its own business. But there's not much time left for me to spend in the dark room. It's quite lonely in the dark room. You know, making prints, I'm one of the few photographers in the world that makes his own prints.
Yeah. Oh. So digital, you've not been seduced by it?
I can feel it coming. There's nothing like a bit of seduction. It's enjoyable occasionally. But, you know, I'm 77 years of age nearly, and therefore, you know, as long as I can use a toothbrush and tie my shoelaces up, that's where I think I have to concentrate in the future.
All right, the final question from Amy O'Brien. Amy, there you are.
Hi. With the increase in citizen journalism, embedding journalists, and the rise in technology, in this day and age, would you still choose a career as a photojournalist?
If I thought I could get recognition for what I've done or what I do without having the memories stashed away up here of all the terrible things I've seen, the answer is not, to be truthful, no. And there's nothing like the enjoyment I get from doing my landscape photography. And, you know, I don't even know how to use my telephone. If there was a tragedy and I was in the area, I don't think I know how to take the picture. I don't know how to use my phone. The truth is, what's been coming out of Syria, which has cost the lives of some of these courageous guys with their mobile phones, it's extraordinary. I think technology is overtaking the oldies like me. Mm. Yeah, but frankly speaking, photography has been very wonderful and generous. But you know, I've had to carry this big rucksack around on my back with all the kind of guilt and the terrible things. I mean, David Bailey is a friend of mine. He got the best end of photography. he got all the beautiful ladies and things. So
let's then finish with one image. This is a picture of you taken by another cameraman, obviously. That's you at war, basically. And I suppose the question is, when you look at that now, what do you see?
I see a very grimy, disillusioned, worn-out-looking man. I spent 2 weeks with these people, never took my clothes off for 2 weeks. A very fastidious person in real life. The man above me is the commander of this company. I was accompanying these guys in the medieval city of Hue, a kind of 12th century place, and the Americans destroyed it. And at the same time, I felt slightly destroyed in this photograph. I flew down the South China Seas in a helicopter back to the press center, and I stood in the shower, took all my clothes off, and, you know, again I was being battered by emotion. I wasn't sure that the water that was running down my head wasn't my own tears. And in a way, the mere fact I can say that means that I cared what I did. I didn't just put the camera to my eye and try to make out that I was a photographer and I wasn't a human being, you know. I think that's why, if I can slightly bang my own drum again, I was on the side of the victims, and I tried to show it.
No one more powerfully and no one better. Don McCullin, thank you very much indeed. Don McCullin.